Okay, so now in the immortal words of Bullwinkle Moose, for something completely different. I'm going to talk to you guys about the biggest changes that are going on in the television industry today, the media industry overall, because there's not much of a gap between television anymore and the rest of the media industry. It's called Life After the Monoculture, How to Survive the Dark Ages of Media. So let's start off. The monoculture was essentially our Roman Empire. So what is the monoculture? Let's define that. It was this era that we had where everybody watched the same thing at the same time on TV. And you were able to reach masses of people all at once with the same programming and also with the same advertising. So if you think of it, and we're going to get back to this, mega brands, whether it's McDonald's, Nike, all of these brands were made possible by the existence of the monoculture because you could, not just in the United States, but anywhere in the world, run TV commercials and be pretty assured that you'd hit most of the population all at once. And so that really created this sort of national culture. People had cultural touch points. I always say that one of the things that we've lost with the monoculture is Saturday Night Live used to be able to do commercial parodies, right? They would have a commercial to make fun of it. They can't really do that anymore because nobody sees the same commercials. They can't assume that most people have seen all of their commercials. In fact, the last commercial parody they did was about 2 years ago, having Marcelo Hernandez make fun of YouTube commercials. So that's sort of where we're at now. We had three very predictable media sources at the time: television, radio, and print, and that was about it. Like you had outdoor, but if you were a brand, you knew where to hit. If you were somebody who wanted to make content, you knew where to hit. And, and everything was very good, and it was all the same pretty much all around the world, where you had all of these three things. And you had gatekeepers who were controlling all of this, and that's really key too. You had people, whether they were studio executives, editors at magazines, radio programmers, who really controlled what was going on, what would be seen. And if you were somebody who wanted to be part of that, if you were somebody who wanted to make content, you had to get past these gatekeepers, which wasn't always easy in that, on the good part, they kept stuff very professional and very good. But on the other part, a lot of people didn't know how to do this. A lot of people just really had no idea. If they had an idea, how would I go get a television series made? How would I get a movie made if I had this idea in my head? So there was this real system of gatekeepers, almost similar to sort of the aristocracy in the old days. But then the internet happened, and we're, very quickly, in the last 2 or 3 years, it's the vandals have sacked Rome. Gatekeepers are gone. And we've got this whole new era now where everything is around social media and people being able to have direct access to audiences. Now, obviously, social media didn't just crop up in the last few years, but the degree to which it has increased in prominence has really ramped up in the last 2 or 3 years, sort of as the mainstream media, the traditional media, have sort of fallen down. Now, streaming for television was really the first crack, because what streaming did is it took time out of the equation. So you could binge watch shows whenever, and you could watch whatever you wanted, when you wanted. You could pick something up and watch it. And that took away the ability to hit everybody all at once. Now, if you go back 10, 15 years, what was it when people wanted this notion of TV everywhere? When Netflix first came out and audience would say, hey, I want that functionality. I want to be able to stop watching TV in my living room and then pick up the show 3 hours later in my bedroom. Networks all freaked out because they're like, no, we can't get the commercials out that way. How do we, our business is predicated on you can hit all these people all at once. And if we start doing that, well, that's not going to happen anymore. But so that was really the first crack. And as streaming, obviously the pandemic sort of amped up the degree to which people were enjoying streaming and turning to it and starting to cut the cord in the US anyway, you really had a huge shift. So now, and again, very quickly in the past few years, the monoculture has been replaced by something that we're calling feudal media. And so what is feudal media? It's a series of self-contained bubbles across a whole variety of platforms, whether it's Twitch and TikTok and YouTube and Substack and Spotify and TV, but they're all like, people have sort of retreated into these little content bubbles. I mean, one of the most fascinating things, if you talk to people who work in politics now, One of the toughest things they will tell you is it's not that people are getting their news from sources that are partisan or biased. They're just not getting the news at all, right? They retreated into these bubbles, and now they're able to ignore the news. And that is why, and this is a true fact, in the week of the election in 2024, the most searched term on Google in the US was, did Joe Biden drop out? Now that's not because people were watching Fox News or MSNBC, it's because they just were ignoring the news. And so people are retreating into all of these little bubbles. And what's fascinating about these little bubbles is sort of how they're structured, very much the way feudal kingdoms were back in the Middle Ages. So now we have influencers, the new royalty. All of these had their own influencers. They have their own slang. They have their own in-jokes. A lot of them even have brands that they like, that everybody in our little bubble likes. And they don't really interact with each other very much. So people sort of retreat into it. Obviously, not everybody's like in a single bubble, but it's very hard to go from bubble to bubble to bubble. And this is freaking advertisers out to no end, right? Because they have no idea how to reach people. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But it's also if you have any kind of content, if you have a movie, how do you hit all these audiences? You can't just run TV commercials anymore. And that's really become a problem as all this goes, but it's also opportunity, which we're going to talk about as well. So in this new economy, attention is really the coin of the realm. By attention, I mean people interacting, people liking. It's a very much a one-to-one and an interactive economy. So we're not just looking at numbers anymore. In other words, it doesn't really matter how many people watch something. It matters how much interaction you get on it. And we're going to talk about how that sort of works to create communities all across, but it's that notion that we're not just pushing stuff out at you anymore, that people are interacting, and that's what people are looking at, whether it's with the creator economy or even with TV series, actors, anybody who sort of is in the public eye. It's that interaction mode, that attention mode, and that's what's really important right now. So YouTube and TikTok have become superpowers. They have about 2 billion with a B users each. And more than that, they are international, right? So that what used to be, you had your American networks, you had the BBC, you had Canal Plus in France, and whatnot. And they also had their own little universes. But now, somebody becomes big on YouTube, they're global. Somebody becomes big on TikTok, they're global. And so we really see boundaries coming down that way as this reaches out. But we're also seeing opportunities to create many, many more bubbles all across different countries, different groups, different age groups, demographics, and all that. But the fact that YouTube and TikTok are sort of where everybody's attention is focused right now is a huge change. And while they've both been around for quite a while, it really feels like in the last year or two that they've sort of come front and center. The very nature, and especially with television, so the very nature of TV viewing has changed. You've probably all seen the Nielsen stat that more people watch YouTube on TV than watch Netflix. Now, this gets debated endlessly. Is YouTube really TV? My thing is, does it matter? Does it matter what we call it? Because it's this thing that people are watching on their TV set, and whether we want to call it new TV, TV 2.0, TV-like object, they're watching it. And what are they watching on TV? That's really interesting, too. So there aren't that many stats in the US, but Barb, which is sort of the Nielsen of the UK, recently came out with some stats, and they found that it's mostly kids programming. It's a lot of Peppa Pig and Bluey and whatnot, and you think about it, like, well, that makes perfect sense. I remember when my kids were little, they would like to watch the same thing over and over and over and over again. And since they know how to use YouTube, it's like, yeah, go watch it on the TV so I can see what you're doing, but, watch as many episodes as you want. So it's not surprising that that is what's happening, but more people are looking at YouTube as just another place to watch content. I mean, if you think about it, the YouTube algorithm is in many ways just a linear channel, right? It's serving you stuff up in order over and over, and whether it's a longer form or shorter form, it's really just a linear channel. And so that's changing the way that everybody kind of looks at media too. And you have, and Melissa and Doug were talking about this, 90-minute shows, movies are now competing with 90-second little clips. And people are sort of watching both. I mean, the assumption, to sort of follow up on something they were saying with a Rogan or one of these 3-hour things, is people have it on the background, they kind of come in and out of it. but you're really competing with a much larger mass of content and content types than you were back in the monoculture days. And that's just a huge shift in the way we have to think about the world. You also have podcasts, gaming, newsletters, everything is out there. There's only 24 hours in a day, right? So you really have to sort of figure out, everything's vying for the same attention span. Now, one of the key things that gets lost in all this is TV, linear TV in particular, is still one of the biggest kingdoms in this feudal media. People haven't just abandoned it. They're still watching TV. They're watching a lot of TV. But it's just not the only thing anymore, and it's not front and center the way it used to be. But it's not dying. It's not going away. It's not disappearing. There's still a lot of it out there. It's just, doesn't have the prominence that it once had. But if you look at all of these little feudal kingdoms, TV is one of the biggest ones. It's one of the most powerful ones, right? So advertisers, and I mentioned this before, advertisers have a real problem now in this new feudal media kingdom, because how do you advertise to the masses when the mass is gone, when there's no more mass media? How do you get out there and hit people with messaging that needs to go out? And that's been a real challenge, and it really is finding these sort of passionate bubbles. You have to sort of find places where the audience, with a lot of that attention, the audience gets passionate about their brand and eventually your product. You have to sort of find a way to talk to them on their terms and become their brand. So in the ideal world, it's, Taylor Swift fans all drink Pepsi and that's their drink. That's obviously not happening, but it's that level. And so it opens up the door for a lot of sort of smaller brands to get out there because they become the brand of a certain bubbles, right? Certain types of people. If I like this, then I like that. And that's something that agencies and advertisers really have had struggled to adapt to because it's a whole new way of thinking about their audiences and how to reach them. So now I'm going to say, what happens now? Where, we've got this feudal media, bubbles, and everything seems to be falling apart. So what happens now? And I'm always an optimist. I get accused of being too much of an optimist sometimes, but I think we're going to see a whole new renaissance coming out of this. And what is going to drive the renaissance is AI, because AI is in many ways the printing press of our age. So if you think about what the original printing press did, before the printing press, knowledge was limited to a very small group of people, right? Most people couldn't read or write. So books had to be written by hand, and there was especially after the fall of Rome, it was monasteries. There were very few places where people could get knowledge. So what happened when the printing press came out was that suddenly knowledge and literature and everything else was democratized. So suddenly you had people being able to get access to new ideas, new thoughts, and distributed. More people learned how to read and write as a result. And so what happened is you had things like democracy came about, right? The old order came down, you had the Enlightenment, you had the Renaissance, you had a whole bunch of new ideas that came out because you could distribute them very widely. And I think this is what's going to happen with the AI. So AI's got a number of things that it's going to be able to do for the greater media ecosystem. So one of the things now, if you look at the creator economy, as it's being called on YouTube, is essentially another flavor of Kardashian, right? It's all nonfiction, it's reality. Mr. Beast is a game show, but there's very little fiction. So whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, at some point AI, and it's probably sooner than later, it's going to let people make fiction. It's going to let people make movies and TV shows. Now, you will still have to write the movie and come up with the idea for it in the TV show, but you won't have to hire actors. You won't have to go through the gatekeepers. You won't have to raise millions. You will actually be able to make something yourself, and that's going to create a whole flowering of creative explosion of all these people who had great ideas, who had passionate stories that they wanted to tell, but didn't know how to go about doing it, weren't able to do it. And so that's some of the ways that we're going to start seeing this come out. It's also going to be able to connect people to different types of content that they may not have known about. We call it the 90s record store experience, where those of you who were alive then, that sort of feeling of wandering around a record store. You'd see a CD, and it's like, oh, that cover looks cool, and you'd listen to it, and it's like, oh, that's really good. I had no idea this existed. So serendipity is the official word for that, but it's bringing that back, and that's going to be one of the big questions and sort of issues. I have no idea how to solve this, but as people start creating much more fiction, how do we train the algorithms so that they're finding stuff that's new and different and not the same old, same old? I always use All in the Family, which was a classic TV show in the 70s as an example. All in the Family didn't do well the first year it was on TV because people didn't know what to make of it. It was so new and so different. And then eventually it caught on and became one of the most popular series of all times. The Great Gatsby also didn't, was sort of dismissed when it came out. They gave it to U.S. soldiers during World War II because it was a thin book, and they didn't enjoy a renaissance. So how do we stop all of these? How do we get people to hit and find all of this stuff that's different and great as opposed to sort of the same old, same old? That's going to be one of the big things that need to be solved in this new era. But bringing it back to sort of more practical terms, how can we, all of us, win in this new media ecosystem, whether you're a content creator, whether you're an advertiser, whether you're somebody who, I'm assuming you're here because you're somehow related to the business. So, first strategy, I'm going to go through 4 strategies here. The first one is to build kingdoms, not just shows. So what this means is you have to think about not just putting the show out there and that's it. You have to sort of engage your whole community. You have to sort of put stuff on YouTube, on TikTok, create clips, try and build a community around the fans of your show so that they're in other places. So you build this passionate fan base where you also have people who are interacting. Again, attention, like I said, is the real currency. Easy example of this, and I was just at MIPCOM, and people were talking about this a whole lot if anybody was there about how all this works. The BBC Studios has a show called Planet Earth, and they launched a YouTube channel for that, and it's become very, very popular, and people watch it. It's got a big fan base. People talk about it all the time, and they find when they release new stuff now that these people are like also psyched. They become evangelists for it, and it really hasn't cannibalized, even though they've been putting full episodes up on YouTube, it hasn't cannibalized their, what they're seeing on TV. So they're very, very happy about it, and we're starting to see a lot more of that. And that's a theory, is you have to think about how do I create a more holistic kingdom for my content, not just sort of aiming it at a single medium. Second part is you need to pull, which is sort of part and parcel, is you need to pull viewers into your kingdom. You can't, the whole, if you build it, they will come, doesn't work anymore. You need to actively engage to market, right? In the old days of TV, NBC would market stuff where you just assume, well, people will tune in at 8 o'clock on Tuesday night and they'll see my show. You can't do that anymore. You've really got to be in charge of your own marketing. You've got to sort of give people a reason to watch it, create fans, put things out there so that you're pulling them in. You can't just push it out there anymore. That just doesn't work. Other thing is, remember that attention, again, this is all part of the same thing. Attention is the new currency. So you have to sort of engage with people. You have to get them to sort of react and get likes. And even though it sometimes is cheesy that you have these super fans and it may not feel like, okay, I'm an artist, I don't want to do this, but that's where we are now. And you have to actually get people to sort of engage and think about, how do I do that? How do I do that in a way that feels authentic to what I do? Fourth piece is to seek out new audiences globally. So that's one of the things that a lot of, whether it's AI is enabling it, but it's more than just the data. So an easy example of this is, it turns out that people who like K-dramas, Korea rolls out a lot of, in addition to K-pop, they roll out a lot of these sort of, very kind of soap opera-like programming. Well, it seems that people who like K-dramas also like telenovelas. And so K-drama has become very popular in Latin America because it's like, well, it's the same thing. We can translate it. AI can make the mouths move now, so it looks like they're speaking Spanish. Turkey also has a very similar industry where they roll out these sort of soapy, soap opera dramas. And again, people are able to find audiences. So the Koreans have been able to find audiences all over the world. The Turks are also. So again, there's different audiences, and we can now connect to each other. Why? Because all media is global, right? So you have the YouTube, you have the TikTok. You don't have to worry about rights and national boundaries and all of that. So in the last bit here, and then we'll hopefully have, you maybe even have some time for a question or two, to talk about sort of what's coming next. So granted, feudal media is chaotic, but it's also an opportunity. And why? Because all the traditional gatekeepers are flailing, right? They don't know what to do. So it's an opportunity for somebody to come in and actually sort of, take charge or grab a piece of what's going on. Whether it's a brand saying, okay, big brands have no way to reach people, or whether it's somebody who has content and wants to get it out there and is able to work this new system, right? That's, the big companies give a lot of lip service to trying to work this new system, but they're pretty hidebound. They move, it's like turning an ocean liner around, which is not an analogy I came up with, but it's a good one. So there's a real opportunity there for you if you are ambitious and you sort of see where everything's going to take charge. Believe that these dark ages, which, where everything is kind of like huddled into these little things, will give way to a new renaissance. Because history is always, what's the expression? History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. So there will be something that comes out of this, and it won't look exactly like what the old monoculture looked like, but there will be this sort of more world culture things where people sort of have different touch points, and it may be this level of personalization where everybody sort of got their own version of something, but we all interact with things, in our own way. So if everybody has sort of a version of the same show or a version of the same sort of channel, it's still much more of a global and universal experience than just being huddled into our own little bubbles. And then whatever you're doing, build a new kingdom. Don't look to recreate the same old empire. Don't go back and go, okay, I'm going to recreate the monoculture because I've created this now. You have to accept that things have changed, that it's a brand new world, and you actually need to go out and create something for this whole new world that looks like where we are now. So that is my advice to you. Thank you all very much. We do have a few questions, and I'm gonna be, TVREV is my company. I should have introduced myself. I am the co-founder and lead analyst of TVREV. We are a big analyst firm in the US. We cover Europe as well, Middle East. If you do that, you can subscribe to our free newsletter. Everything is free. And I'm going to take questions here. Garrett, you have the microphone. Let's start with Mr. David Bloom.
Hey, Alan, always delightful to see you on this coast.
Thank you.
You look like you've been lost from New Jersey.
Yes.
This morning I wrote a little story about Teens and Screens, a new report, the fourth out of this UCLA center, talking about teenagers, and they are actually adolescents, which they say from 10 to 24, and their viewing patterns. And I'd love for you to talk, because all your stuff, of course, is always very cogent and on the mark, but there are different consumption patterns for different tranches of demographics. Can you talk a little bit about, from your perspective, how you build for the audiences that are coming as opposed to the audiences that are going?
Yeah, and I think, teenagers grow up too, right? So what people who have a short attention span now, and as Doug and Melissa were just talking, the same 17-year-olds who will, flip through TikTok will also listen to Joe Rogan for 3 hours. So it is a mix of, of what people listen to, and it's whatever engages you, and you have to sort of understand that, this new audience is used to this world. They don't remember. So that's what's amazing to me, David, is we all, even somebody who's 25 now, has a cultural touch point, right? They all watch Blue's Clues or Thomas the Tank Engine. Kids won't have that anymore, right now, because there is no one thing. There'll be a bunch of them who all watch Mr. Beast, but not all of them. And so it's kind of crazy.
Just real quickly, there was a very fun bit on the NBA games last night on Peacock, and they interviewed these star players who were 25 years old about Michael Jordan, and go, before I was born.
Yeah, oh God, don't do that to me. We had another question in the back.
Hey, Alan.
Colin, okay.
We haven't had a chance to talk about this, and I've got very specific views, but I'm interested in yours. Can traditional media, like I'm thinking about Netflix, co-opt feudal media to grow their audience and engage their audience? I'm thinking of things like Netflix, Spotify deal that they just announced this week, Ted Sarandis, even yesterday, was saying that they'll take talent wherever they can find it to create stuff for Netflix, and they are looking obviously at YouTube influencers and TikTok influencers to do that. What do you think of those efforts?
I mean, I think so the answer to your question is, can they? Yes. Will they? I don't know. If you remember a few years ago, Netflix was like, oh, anime, Crunchyroll, we're going to do that. And they hired a bunch of like anime guys, and the anime, however they did it, the anime community was like, you're fake, this doesn't work, we're not dealing with you, and it sort of fizzled out. They eventually kind of got some of it back, but a lot of it is, the question, and they can do it, is, do they have the smarts, are they willing to sort of check their egos enough to go, we don't know any of this stuff, we're going to let people who actually know how to do this do it. And bring it in. So that, that's the thing. Like, so can Netflix do it? But it's going to be, they have a bigger hurdle because they're Netflix, right? So they have to be super authentic, and maybe they give it a different brand. I mean, I'm not going to give them their strategy from here, but it's not going to be as easy for them. But it's possible. Anyone else?
One more, maybe? One more?
Okay, gentleman over there. Yeah.
With AI in its infancy, I'm curious in the future when reality and AI become indistinguishable, how do we bring clarity to those minds who become so confused?
Gosh, if I had the answer to that. I mean, I think that at some point, government will have to step in and AI stuff will be, will be tagged. But even that's unlikely, and that's like, or it's unlikely that people will comply with it. So that is going to be a huge challenge. How do you know, especially if people want to make nasty videos about their political opponents or something, or somebody wants, more than that, somebody wants to rip off existing content. Let's put it in more easy terms. Somebody wants to rip off something and say, oh, here's the next episode of this, or here's, a thing. I don't know how we solve that, but we do. I think that stuff that's made by humans is going to have a lot of value. That's why I was saying that people who need to, you will need to write the script and come up with the characters, and the AI can cast it for you and give you the backgrounds, but you still have to come up with a story. Now, will AI write stories? Yeah. If anybody's seen, microdramas are huge now. It's sort of, a lot of people are sleeping on this, or Hollywood's kind of waking up to it now. They're these, these little hour and a half, I mean, it's an hour and a half in full. They're sort of distributed in like 1 to 3 minute segments. And they're awful. I mean, the acting is like, oh my God, you are a zombie. Ah! And it's, and I'm giving them credit on that. So I can see that AI will do this. In Reel Shorts, if any of you have not checked this out, download Reel Shorts. It's been the top 10 in the iTunes and the Apple and Google stores since 2023 in the US. It's got a huge audience, funny enough, of women. The core audience is women 25 to 45, some of whom pay $80 a month for this because it's a gamification platform. But that's where I can see, and this is a roundabout to answer your question, that's where I can see AI really taking off, is like in something like that, in like House Hunters, right? You don't need much, but for most stuff, I think it's the fact that humans had something to do with it, that's going to be key. All right. Okay. Well, thank you all very much.